Hey guys, welcome to a new movie review. Today I'm going to be talking about the new Ang Lee film Gemini Man. This film stars Will Smith, Mary Elizabeth Winstead, Clive Owen. Um, I really like Ang Lee as a director a lot. There's not a lot of films I can really call my favorite from him though, but it's one of those things where I always admire kind of what he brought to the table as a director, both visually and as a storyteller. He's given us some great films like Life of Pi, Brokeback Mountain, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. He's a very talented man. His last film, Billy Lynn's Long Halftime Walk, I wasn't a huge fan of. I was really anticipating that film when it came out. I was very let down when that came out. So Gemini Man, it was one of those things where I'm really looking forward to it. It has a promising concept going for it. Is it going to be the return of Ang Lee? And thankfully, even though reviews might tell you elsewhere, no. But I personally thought Gemini Man was a very good movie. I really liked it. I really liked the concept of it. I liked what Will Smith did, both as himself and as this clone and things like that. So let's go over some positives and negatives and a synopsis of Gemini Man. So in this film, you guys, for the synopsis, it's basically Will Smith as this aging hitman. He's trying to retire. He's been killing a lot of people over the years and just is really sick of it. Wants to move on. Wants to try something different and more productive. So it basically gets to retire. He's going fishing. He's visiting old friends. He's just doing things that most people just get to do on a regular basis for once. Um, but he's later called back into action when both the people he's once worked with and himself are in danger of being killed off from this random rogue squad of some kind. He also finds out that he has this clone of himself running around that's basically doing what he was once doing before retiring. So throughout the course of this film, he has to figure out what exactly is this clone doing. Why is he basically continuing the work that Will Smith claimed he was retiring from, and why they got this clone to do the work for him now, and why his friends and former coworkers of this company are being killed off, and why basically his company that he's worked for years is now turning on him and making him looking out to be this really bad person, and why they're giving him that image. And so all this stuff is resolved and figured out over the course of the film Gemini Man. So like I said, guys, I really enjoyed this film. It's not my favorite Ang Lee film. It's not my favorite film of the year or anything like that. But there's a lot of things in this film that I really admire. And it's still one of those films where I'm still kind of scratching my head and trying to figure out what exactly the critics hated so much about this movie. Was it just the fact that Ang Lee's this really big director and he's giving us this film that isn't the most amazing thing we've ever seen, and that's why people feel like they have to hate on it as much as they have? I don't really get it, but for me personally, this is going to be a positive review. I'm going to let you know what I liked about Gemini Man and why it's not Ang Lee's best film, but there's things in it that I think could have been worked on, could have been improved upon, maybe could have used another draft of the script before going into production, but let's talk about some positives and negatives. So, for the most part, guys, for one of the positives, I really like this idea of this hitman trying to retire. He's been doing it for years, just wants to do something that doesn't involve killing anybody. And I liked how this film really made it about this guy trying to get out of that life and move on to something more productive and do something that kind of means something to him for once, and try to leave that life behind him. So I like that aspect of the film. For the first half of the film, it's very much about that, about this guy moving on and trying to get away from this murderous career that he's been doing for a while. So I really like that aspect of Gemini Man a lot. There's also some really nice shooting locations that Ang Lee had to work with in this movie, whether it's some temples, whether it's Budapest, whether it's kind of the more resort side of Georgia. Um, there's basically all these places all over the world that they filmed at for this movie. And it really helps this film. It's a very beautiful film to look at, even on the scenes where it's just Will Smith trying to figure things out, and they're not so concerned about the action scenes and things like that in certain scenes. They have some really nice shooting locations to work with in this movie. And like I just mentioned, this film really is a very visually beautiful film. Ang Lee's always been known for making very visually nice movies. Even films like Brokeback Mountain, where it's not so much about the visuals, that one was more so about the story going on. He's always very good about visually giving us something very beautiful to look at, whether it's the location it's taking in, or the water that they're in, or this, or giving us like a nice blue field of color to work with, or just a nice color palette to work with on film. Ang Lee's always been very good about visually beautiful movies. They also used a lot of de-aging effects for the Will Smith clone character in this movie, and it's very good de-aging effects. You really do feel like you're looking at a younger Will Smith in this movie. I definitely felt like I was looking at kind of the Men in Black 1, Fresh Prince of Bel-Air side of Will Smith when they show his younger self in this movie. It really does look like modern day Will Smith talking to a younger past Will Smith. So I thought that aspect of the film was very effective and very good. The de-aging effects of Will Smith are very powerful in this movie, and they're very effective and very believable. Mary Elizabeth Winstead from 10 Cloverfield Lane and Scott Pilgrim vs. the World had a role in this movie, and I really liked her side character in this film a lot. She helps Will Smith in this movie. She's just kind of this fish boat supervisor person at the beginning of the movie, but she becomes much more than that as the film progresses. She becomes much more than just this friend of Will Smith. She really is a very helpful character in this movie. Really kind of appreciate everything she's doing for Will Smith. And I like how they didn't go the relationship route with this. They didn't go like the best friend route or anything like that either. But I like how she was really kind of this character that's kind of in Will Smith's shoes, and he hasn't been doing this career as long as he has, obviously. But they're kind of both in the same company, both kind of betrayed by the same company, and they're working together to kind of figure out what exactly is going on in this company and things like that. So really liked her character, really liked her performance. Mary Elizabeth Winstead gives a really good performance in this movie. There's also some well-staged action scenes in this movie. There's specifically a scene where Will Smith and his clone are trying to duke it out on a bike somewhere, and they're following each other around. They're trying to avoid traffic and things like that. There's some really well-staged action scenes in this movie, so I thought Ang Lee did a very good job on that aspect of the movie. For my negatives, though, at Gemini Man, like I said, it's not Ang Lee's best film, but it's definitely a very admirable film, one of his more admirable films in a long time, probably since Life of Pi. But for my negatives of this movie, though, there is some silly action scenes in this movie. One scene I can safely talk about that doesn't really give anything away, but it's just really silly to watch as you're looking at it. Is there's a scene where Will Smith is fighting this person, and they light on fire in like this biker suit thing. And it's not from the scene I just mentioned a second ago, but it's a different scene. So this guy has like this biker suit on, he's lit on fire, and he starts charging at Will Smith after being lit on fire. And he looks like the Human Torch from Fantastic Four. It looks really bad. And they kind of CGI the fire onto this person in the scene. It looks bad. That's one of the scenes is where I was looking at myself like, oh, Ang Lee, what are you doing, man? So there's a couple scenes that are kind of silly. Another one I can safely tell you because it's in the trailer is there's a scene where like this guy's trying to shoot down Will Smith and Mary Elizabeth Winstead, and he has like this Grand Theft Auto outfit thing on, and it just looks really silly. And then another one that's in the trailer that's also really silly is on the bike scene. It's really cool as you're watching it, but as it wraps up, the clone guy does like this weird spinny thing, and he tries to throw the bike at Will Smith, and it's very silly. Feels like something out of a cartoon show. So there was some really silly moments in this movie that really kind of feel like they're from a different, worse movie. So I don't know if the critics are hating on those or what, but there is some really silly action scenes in certain moments of this movie. There's also, even though I liked the de-aging effect of Will Smith, on scenes where like he's really far away, or you can tell they have like a stand-in or a stunt double of some kind, on the scenes where he's like really far away from camera, there's just some really weird, like it's his face, but on like a different person on some of these shots, and it just looks really weird. And I don't know. So as much as I like the de-aging effect, it works for the most part. It definitely works up when they're working close by with Will Smith. So, but maybe it's just the fact that he's far away in certain scenes. It almost looks like it's kind of like a copy and paste on a different person. So I thought some of the CGI in this film was kind of weird to look at in certain scenes. I also thought, even though I liked a lot of the shooting locations they had to work with in this movie, some of the scenery in this film just felt really overly clean to me. Like they just kind of freshly laundered and soaked off like all the walls on certain scenes. So certain scenes feel like they just like freshly painted the place, even though it's like really old Budapest scenery in certain scenes. So some of it felt a little movie-ish to me. It just felt like it was a little too overly clean before they got there. So some of the scenery just felt a little too clean to me for an action movie. I also thought some of the uses, because there's a lot of messages about cloning in this movie with the Will Smith clone and the person that they cloned him from and things like that. Some of the uses of cloning and some of the messages they're trying to bring up are really silly in this movie. There's one I can't give away, but there's a scene in this movie where not only does Will Smith's character have a clone, but they did something additional to that I thought was really silly. It's brought up at the very end of the movie. It's very silly. So there's just certain aspects about the cloning aspect of the movie that just felt really silly and really over the top to me, and just kind of pushed the boundaries on too many things at once on certain scenes. So for the overall, I'm going to give Gemini Man an 8.5 out of 10. It's a very good movie. There's a lot of visually nice things about it. Like I said, I like the whole idea of this hitman trying to retire, trying to get out of this life. I thought that was very interesting. Some well-staged action scenes, even though some of them are very silly at times. And I really liked what they did with Mary Elizabeth Winstead's character as well. So I'm going to give this an 8.5 out of 10. I liked Gemini Man. I think it's worth checking out if you're an Ang Lee fan or even an action movie fan or even a Will Smith fan. Nice little movie, good from Ang Lee. Definitely a nice recovery for me personally from Billy Lynn's Long Halftime Walk. So 8.5 out of 10 for me.